My name is Lorelei Greenleafe, and I live here in Atlantia in the Barony of Sacred Stone. And one of my passions is growing medieval variety foods, mostly vegetables, and preserving them. You know, growing them is fun, but being able to use them is key to preserving that harvest. And one of the ways I found that is perfectly medieval period to preserve your food is through lacto fermentation. Oh, come on, it doesn't want to advance. There we go. All right, and I'm not going to talk a lot about the history, mostly because there is so much out there, and you can just pick one small part of the whole lacto fermentation history and concentrate just on that. And pretty much humans have been fermenting foods for thousands of years. Some of the oldest include meads, which is fermented honey, and fermented milk and cheese. And I expect a lot of this fermentation was discovered by accident, which so many of our human inventions and innovations often are. It's like, whoops, I left that sitting too long. You know, ooh, hey, this tastes different. It's pretty good. In the case of fermented honey, you know, you may have heard that honey lasts forever. And it does. It stores unbelievably well, unless there's a high water content. If there's a high water content, it ferments, and then you get mead. But anyway, some of the foods that we've had throughout history, including the medieval times, and that we still eat today in modern times, is sauerkraut and kimchi, all kinds of different pickled vegetables, relishes, salsas, chutneys, all of that good stuff listed there, miso, and of course beverages, wine, beer, and some of the less well-known. So 4,000 years ago, the Egyptians were fermenting grapes into wine and yeast for leavened bread. 8,000 years ago, fermentation of vegetables. There's evidence of that in Asia. Another 8,000 years ago in the Middle East, they were working with fermented milk. And in Sweden, 7,000 years ago is the earliest known fish fermentation. And which of course the Romans made famous in their garum. So as you can see, this has been going on for a really long time. Now, what the heck is lacto fermentation? Well, you're probably familiar with the term fermentation. And we all pretty much know alcohol fermentation, beer and wine. And in that case, the byproduct of the yeast, which converts the sugars, is alcohol. The byproduct is alcohol. And that is, many yeasts will ferment, and the byproduct is alcohol. In this case, the bacteria doing the fermentation process is lactobacillus. It will not produce alcohol in the from the lactobacillus. So lactobacillus, it's pretty much present everywhere on all living things, mostly growing things, especially if you have vegetables near the ground, leaves on the ground. Excuse me. You can pick up any one of those and test them for lactobacillus bacteria, and it will be present. So what the lactobacilli do is they convert all of the sugars in the vegetables, meat, whatever you're fermenting, into lactic acid. And that acid is what inhibits the growth of bacteria and allows the food to be preserved so it's not going to go bad and get you sick. And this has to occur, this is an anaerobic process, which means it has to happen without the presence of oxygen. And we accomplish that by a couple different ways that we're going to get into in a little bit. So lactic acid preserves the fruits, vegetables, cheese, whatever you happen to be using. And it also breaks down some of the minerals and vitamins to make them more digestible or more easily digestible. And it promotes all that good, healthy gut bacteria that we hear about, and that, it's called probiotic. So lacto fermentation, no alcohol, has to happen in the absence of oxygen, and makes it more healthy. All right, so in order for the bacteria, the bad bacteria, to be inhibited, we need salt. Salt is a must for the lacto fermentation process. Never mind. It's the fermentation process is kind of like in two different stages. First, stage one, the harmful bacteria cannot survive in the presence of salt, but the lactobacilli can, the healthy bacteria, the bacteria that we want. The harmful bacteria is wiped out in the very first stage of fermentation. Stage two is the lactobacillus organism begins to convert all those sugars in the food into lactic acid. And the lactic acid creates an acidic environment. Bacteria cannot grow. The harmful bacteria cannot grow in an acidic environment. And that process, that lactic acid, that lactobacillus, it's what gives that tangy crunchiness to a dill pickle that I'm sure you've experienced, or other fermented vegetables. It's that yummy tanginess. So what can we ferment? Oh my gosh, we can ferment so many different things. Keep my timer on here. Garlic, cucumber, onion. I don't know if you've ever had like fermented garlic, but it's really good. Cucumber, of course, pickles, all kinds of pickles. And we use the term pickles to include vinegar pickling, lacto fermented pickling. We kind of use that as a generic term. But, well, there is a distinction between the vinegar and the lacto fermented pickles. Okay, so carrots, cabbage, peppers, eggplant, all of these things you see on the list there can be pickled. Some will last longer than others. For example, the squash does not last as long as, say, the string beans. And fruits you typically have to use quicker than some of the other vegetables. And when I first started researching this, I was amazed to discover that you can use lacto fermentation to preserve meats and fish. I believe I had in that, did I have that? Yeah, in one of those pictures there. It was the salami. Salami is cured by the process of lacto fermentation. And it's a combination of a bunch of different meats and salt. And after the salt cures the meat, after it gets rid of all the bad bacteria and it adds that flavor, then the salami is dried. So, it's kind of neat, and fish too. So lots and lots of things. I've never had lacto fermented beets, but I understand you can do it. I think I've had everything else on the list. Not sure I've ever eaten lacto fermented fish. So to get started, and this is kind of going to be a walkthrough tutorial of how you can start doing this at home. And there is some fancy equipment you can purchase, like the top picture there. It's just you screw them on top of the jars. One of the byproducts of lacto fermentation is carbon dioxide. So you need a way for the gases to escape. And you can stick those on, or you can just leave the cover like the bottom. You can see the bottom picture, leave the covers loose, or you can make whatever you're making in a large container and then later move it over to smaller containers when the fermentation process is done and just put the lid on. In order to stop the fermentation process, you do need to cool them. Otherwise, they'll just keep fermenting, and you can end up with kind of really strong and bitter, kind of a sour taste, which some people love, like sauerkraut. Yeah, to move my gourd. Hang on. Okay. When you're any kind of processing of food, you need to make sure all your surfaces are clean and sanitized. And same with the jars you're using or the containers you're using, sanitize them as well as you're able. I have some ceramic crocks I use, and it's hot soapy water, clean them, dry them and put something over them so dust, dog hair in my house, whatever can't get in until you're ready to use them. The cans, the jars, not the cans, the jars, usually if I'm doing a bunch, I'll put them in the dishwasher and run the dishwasher on hot and just leave them in there and let them dry in there until you're ready to use them. Or you can boil them too. Right, you can boil them. So clean utensils, fresh vegetables. You cannot ferment frozen, canned, old vegetables. So you want them as fresh as possible. And utensils are clean. And then use kosher or pickling salts. Because regular table salt and a lot of other salts, even like some of the sea salts, they have additives like the anti-caking agent, or table salt is iodine. And iodine will inhibit the fermentation process. So you don't want anything. Just make sure kosher salt, pickling salts. I typically use kosher salt. It's a whole lot cheaper than pickling salts, and I find it comes just as well, comes out great. So fruits, vegetables, everything should be at room temperature. And I have there the brine, which is the water you're going to use to make the brine. And you also need to use non-chlorinated water. And here at our house, we're on a well, and our water is a little bit hard. So and it made my pickles a little bit soft. So what I have started doing is buying buying water, and which I hate doing. So yeah, if you have chlorinated water, if you're on city water, buy a couple jugs of water if you're going to do a big lacto fermentation or canning project. And then everything at room temperature, and it needs to be at room temperature because if it's too chilled, that will inhibit the lacto fermentation process. The good bacteria won't grow. All right, so all of these, oh, is that a double? Oh no, I'm going backward. Wait, sorry, I'm a spaz. Okay. One of the easiest things to start with if you want to try lacto fermentation is, like dill pickles or mixed vegetables, pickles, or sauerkraut. Sauerkraut has been made for thousands of years. and popular in different places in the world at different times. And of course, cabbages. We've got cabbages, documentation of cabbages well before the Roman times. And they looked a little different than they do now, but they're just as delicious. You can use red cabbage or the white cabbage, the non-iodized salt, non-reactive container. So this salt will, and the acid that's produced from the lactobacillus will etch a steel or cast iron or anything like that. So you want to use ceramic, or you can use stainless steel. And I use ceramic, pretty much glass and ceramic. You don't want to store it in any stainless steel, but you can mix it in there. That's okay. So non-reactive containers if you're making sauerkraut, caraway seeds and juniper berries are often added. And you can buy the edible type of juniper berries. Don't go out and pick those little blue juniper berries off your shrubbery. That might be the poisonous ones. And then you just need a little bit of time. Oh, and something to slice up your cabbage with. I have a vocal cord issue, so I apologize for my froggy voice. So the first time I made sauerkraut, that was a lot of fun. I had 4 heads of cabbage, I think, and some friends to help me cut it. That cutting board there you see is pretty like a mandolin. It's pretty much what they used back in the day. And there are some German woodcuts that have, that show a similar apparatus there. But, if you want to use your electronic, whatever, food processor, that's perfectly okay. So slice the cabbage pretty thin, put it in the container, sprinkle salt, and then wait. The salt will pull the water out of the vegetable, and that's what creates the brine. Some people will make a brine, and I have the proportions later on in the presentation. Some people will make a brine, but which I do for dill pickles, but not for the sauerkraut. You want the water drawn out of the sauerkraut, and that's what's going to make it crunchy. That water is going to come out. It's going to retain the crunch. And you will be amazed at how quickly, if you've never done this, you'll be amazed at how quickly the salt draws out the water. While you're still putting cabbage in, there's already brine forming in the vessel. You can also mash the cabbage as you're putting it in the container. If you look at some of the old-timey, the way they did it, they had a wooden mallet and they mash the cabbage down and put salt and put more cabbage in it, mash it down and salt. And that helps break up and loosen the fibers in the cabbage. And it brines quicker, but it's totally not necessary. And I've done it both ways. And honestly, I don't see a big difference. If you're mashing it down, you can fit way more sauerkraut in your container. And that's the biggest difference. And maybe that's why they were doing it. I don't know. So as the brine forms, by the end of the day, you're going to have a full container of brine with the cabbage in there. And if you don't, you can add some water, a salt water mixture. You can add brine, and again, the proportions I have later. And you want to keep this underwater because remember, the lactobacillus need an oxygen-free environment, and the brine is what provides that oxygen-free environment. And all that cabbage is going to want to float. So you need something. They make things, they make tools, they make these weights that will fit inside the ceramic containers. or whatever you're using, and that will keep everything under the brine. Well, the cabbage has little bits and pieces, and that always float up. And I'll sometimes put a little bit of cheesecloth, and then I put the weight, and that weight is absolutely necessary. And I should probably have a picture of it here, because that's what's going to keep the sauerkraut, the cabbage, from rising up. And it's also going to help compress the cabbage, and more of that moisture is going to be drawn out. So shredded cabbage, salt, season it however you like, weigh it down, leave it alone. I have found, like the dill pickles, I like my fermentation at about 10 days. And everybody's going to be a little bit different. Now, you have to do not put this in the refrigerator, because the cold will inhibit the growth of the beneficial bacteria. You need it at room temperature. And if you have a cold house, put it in a warmer spot to encourage that fermentation, like on top of the refrigerator. And I think the first time I made the cabbage, the sauerkraut, it was like late fall, and my house is pretty chilly, and it took forever. But putting it in a warmer area, when I had done it after that, it was like, whoa, okay, I see this now, and it's going to be bubbling. And again, it's releasing carbon dioxide, and you want that to be able to escape. So after you put in, okay, we have our sauerkraut, we've got our brine, we know that it's all under the brine. I put my cheesecloth in. You don't have to. Sometimes you can lay an ungraded cabbage leaf on top, and then you have your weight, and then cover it with a cloth, not like plastic wrap or anything, because you want that gas exchange, but cover it with a cloth. It not only does it keep out pet hair if you have cats and dogs, it'll also keep out like fruit flies or anything else that wants to get in there and ruin your project. But taste it, start tasting it after a week, 8 days. I like mine at 10. Sauerkraut, you might want to leave longer. And it will get more sour the longer it leaves. So taste it. And when it tastes good to you, take it out, put it in the fridge, or put it in whatever you're going to store it in, put it in the fridge to stop that lacto fermentation process. And then, store it in a cold place, in a cool place, so that lacto fermentation doesn't continue. And check the jars every once in a while, because sometimes if it warms up, it's going to get bubbly again. So you got to loosen those jars and release the gas. Some people keep it in the same container, like keep it in the crock, and then they just take it right from there, use it right from there. That's totally okay. You want it to stay submerged in that brine. The older it is, the more sour flavor it will have, and that's totally okay. Sometimes it will form a film on the top, and that's pretty much okay. Sometimes it's green, and that's okay too. It will get a little bit of mold on top sometimes. And you skim it off before you're going to put it in its jars, and it's no big deal. If it gets a really nasty, smelly kind of mold on there, then yeah, you don't want to use that for whatever reason. You don't want it too warm, if it's 90 degrees out. No. So again, room temperature is about 70 degrees, 72 degrees. I had somebody tell me that they used to make, when it was an older woman, and she told me, it was years ago, that her grandmother had made the dill pickles in barrel, the pickle barrels. And I think it wasn't one of the huge pickle barrels, but she said that green mold would cover the top, and that would help keep the oxygen out. And they would just move aside that layer of green mold and get your pickle out, whatever, and it would slide back. And so apparently it's no big deal, but I guess the smell is what you have to watch for. And but again, if you have the right salt content, that's not likely going to happen. Put that person in. Okay. So that's cabbage. I highly recommend trying the sauerkraut out of the cabbage. And it's simple. It doesn't take that long. And you'll be amazed at how delicious it tastes. And you'll have a really wonderful sense of accomplishment. So pickled vegetables is another pretty easy lacto fermentation project that you can do. And again, these are all period. These are all medieval period. This stuff was done for, hundreds and thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds, some thousands of years, some hundreds of years. So pickled vegetables, let's talk pickles. Okay, let's say cucumber pickles, or the traditional dill pickle is a lacto fermented pickle, and that's that kind of tanginess to it. You need the brine, and whenever you're using, or if you're making the salt brine, 1 to 3 tablespoons per quart of water. And I use 2 because I never know. 1 to 3, I'll use 2. And that's pretty standard across any recipe you're going to look. They're going to say 1 to 3 tablespoons of sugar per quart of water. And that's the amount of salt that is needed to inhibit the bad bacteria and allow the good stuff to grow. So don't skimp on the salt. To make those traditional crunchy dill pickles, you're going to want tannins, and the tannins, it really helps that crunch. And you'll get the tannins from, traditionally you get it from grape leaves, which is what I have in there, that bottom picture. The top picture is not mine, that's somebody else's picture, but the bottom one is, or some people call them grape leaf pickles, but yeah, the tannins come from grape leaves. I put grape leaves at the bottom and I put grape leaves on the top, and that's going to keep the cucumbers from rising up, help keep them under the water. You can also use oak leaves. I have been in the winter, taught a class a while ago, a couple years ago, and it was a hands-on class, in person university, and I didn't have any grape leaves, and I'm like, wait a second, oak leaves, tannins. And then I did some research, and it's like, yeah, you can. And I didn't pick them up off the ground, but we have a pin oak, and they keep their leaves during the winter. So I just went and picked some off the tree, and we used that, and it came out great. Some people will use black tea as the tannin, and I've never tried that, so go for it. And if you don't have the grape leaves like I had for putting on the top to keep the vegetables down, just use cabbage leaf, and that'll keep everything under the brine, because anything above the brine is going to be no good to eat. So for dill pickles, the classic dill pickles, you need the dill leaves, the fine dill leaves, dill seed, celery seed. Don't forget the celery seed. That makes it delicious. Mace, garlic. Be careful with the garlic. Garlic can overpower cucumbers really fast. Garlic and onions both. Peppers, black, and it says reed, but you can put red. Bay, mustard seed. You can add ginger, cloves, coriander, cardamom, cinnamon. These are all typical, but the traditional dill pickles typically had dill seed, dill leaves, celery seed, garlic, and black pepper. And all that other stuff. You play with the, you have your warm spices, and you play with the spices a little bit and see how it goes. Coriander, put in the coriander seeds if you're making traditional dill. Some people don't like to have the spices floating all over the place in their pickle mixture. You can put it in you can tie up a little bundle of with a cheesecloth, and just put that in. For dill pickles, I just throw everything in. When I make my sweet pickles, I use a bundle instead. Okay. Okay, again, room temperature, wash all the vegetables. Don't skip that step. Vegetables, especially if you got them from the farmer's market or you grew them or whatever, they have all kinds of bacteria and stuff on them. Wash them and then cut them into bite-sized pieces, put them in the jars, add your seasoning and your tannins, cover with brine, 1 cup of salt to a gallon if you're doing that much, or 1 to 3 tablespoons per quart, and put the cabbage leaves on top. Okay, easy peasy. Don't tighten something down because it's releasing carbon dioxide. And again, start tasting after a week and see how you like them. And you can store all these in the fridge, or you can store them in a cool place, but you do need to put them in the fridge to stop that fermentation process. And okay, let's talk about, did I cover everything on that last one? Wait. Okay. Remember, we want it all to stay under the brine. Don't forget that part. Cut the bud end of the cucumber. Somebody need to do a grammar check on this presentation. Take a look at those cucumbers. There's a flower at one end. That's the bud end of a cucumber. One end is attached to the stem. You get the cucumber flower. The bee pollinates it. Yay, fruit. The end of that will be the bud end. And you can see a difference between the two. You can see where the stem, where it was picked off of the stem. Cut the bud end off. If you're not sure which is the bud end, cut both ends off of the cucumber. The bud end contains some hormones that are going to make your dill pickles soft, and we don't want that to happen. So with cucumbers, make sure the bud end is cut off. And some of the best variety, you can make pickles out of any cucumber varieties, but some are going to turn out better than others. The Kirby style cucumbers, like I particularly like the Boston pickling cucumbers. You can tell the Kirby varieties they have all those bumps. They're pretty small compared to some of the other ones, and they've got all those bumps. And you want to pick your cucumbers smaller rather than larger for pickles anyway. There's fewer seeds and they've got that nice crunch. Some of the ones that don't do as well for pickling are the Persian and the English cucumbers, the long English cucumbers, and then the ones that are waxed. They're table cucumbers or slicing cucumbers, they're often called, and they're waxed. And you don't want to use any of that. You can. The Persians actually, they're okay, but they just don't last as long, and they get soft faster. All right, your liquid is going to be cloudy. If you see a beautiful crystal clear jar of pickles somewhere, it's not lacto fermentation, that's vinegar. And the cloudiness, it's fine. It's not going to hurt you. There's nothing wrong with it. The brine becomes cloudy, and it'll eventually all settle out to the bottom, and you won't have to worry about it. Be careful with the garlic and onions and peppers. They do tend to overpower. Proper varieties, and taste them when it's right. Okay, we talked about most of this. Oh, fruits. Yeah, fruits don't last as long as many of the vegetables. We did Honora Hall, you know her. We did a feast, a Moroccan feast. That's not right. Whatever we did, Middle Eastern feast, and we did fermented lemons, and it came out so good. I think we like cut the lemons and stuffed cardamom and salt down in there, and man, that was good. But they will go bad sooner. And you know what? You're going to know if your vegetables have gone bad because they stink. So, other pickles. I'm going to just, we have time. Okay. other pickles that I make these, they're sometimes called 8-day pickles. I make sweet pickles. These take sugar. And there is a Moroccan sweet pickle, period Moroccan sweet pickle. And I've made those before, but for my everyday, when I make them just for me, I did that for an ANS project, but for me, I put in different spices anyway, and you can play with these spices. These are great with a little bit of clove, allspice, pepper, cardamom, and then coriander. To make them a little hot, a little spicy with the sweet. It's really yummy. Now, the way these pickles are made, they're made with vinegar. There's no cooking well, there's blanching, but no cooking involved. And technically it's the acids in the vinegar that are cooking the cucumber, and that's what preserves them. So this is a recipe right here. You're welcome to try it out. And you, again, wash the cucumbers, get rid of that bud end when you're slicing them up, but soak them in ice water for 30 to 40 minutes. And then you can do it before or after you cut them up. In a non-reactive container, pour boiling water over them, and that's going to blanch them, and that's going to take care of a lot of the harmful bacteria right off the bat. Leave them there for 24 hours. The next day, drain the water. Do not rinse. Do not rinse the cucumbers. And you're going to want to rinse it because this scummy, foamy stuff forms on the top. Doesn't matter. It's going to go away. It's not going to hurt you. You don't want to rinse the cucumbers. Second day, drain the water. Do not rinse. Cover with fresh boiling water and pickling salts. 1.5 cups per gallon of water. And day 3, drain the water. Do not rinse. Cover with fresh boiling water and alum. 2.5 tablespoons per gallon of water. And I find when I do this, I use about a gallon of water. So that works out. The alum, you can use pickling lime instead of the alum. I find the alum makes a better pickle, but whatever, try it out. The alum, it's interesting. The salt that you did in the step prior to this draws the water out. When the next day, when you put in the alum, some of that moisture is going to be drawn back into the tissue of the pickle. And the alum actually replaces some of the cell structure, some of the cellulose, not cellulite, with alum, with that compound. It's actually an aluminum compound. So, and that helps it with crunchiness and remaining firm. It's totally edible. Don't worry. It's cooking stuff. And so after that, next day, drain the water out, drain it all out. Do not rinse. Covered with a gallon of boiled cider vinegar and your pickling spices. And for this, like I said, I put it in a little pouch. 3 to 5 tablespoons, whatever spices you want to use. And I use about 30 pounds of cucumbers, good amount of cucumbers. And don't touch this. Put the boiling water on. Don't touch it for day 5, 6, and 7. The vinegar is going to cook it. Oh, and at every single one of these steps, make sure you cover it with a cloth for the same reasons. You don't want anything falling in there that shouldn't be in there. The vinegar stage puts off a really strong smell. Stick it in the laundry room. Stay it somewhere out of the way where you're not going to smell that, unless you love the smell, and that's okay. On day 8, pour off the vinegar, discard the spices. And the reason I discard the spices is because you're using things like clove and allspice. And if they get in the jars with the pickle, it really can overpower the pickles. You want spice, but you don't want want it to be overpowered. So, okay, you're pouring off the vinegar, get rid of the spices, put the pickles in your sterilized jars, and fill those jars to the top with sugar. Put on the cover, shake them all around. And what you'll notice over probably 2 days, mine usually take 2 days, the sugar will draw the vinegar out of the pickle and it will form a brine. It will, in this case, it's a syrup. It'll form a syrup, and that is what's going to keep your pickles. And again, with this, they don't have to be under the brine. They can poke out the brine a little bit. It's a different process, so it's okay. You can taste them after that. They're going to taste like vinegar pickles with sugar on them. But after about 30 days, man, they are so good. You're going to have to kind of turn the jars, get that sugar and the syrup around the all of the cucumber pieces. And that's a little labor intensive, but don't shake them too hard. You don't want to break it up or whatnot, but just get that. And if sometimes you need more sugar, sometimes you only get about this much syrup and you want that much syrup. So, oh, I think you can see that. So there. And you might have to put more sugar in. And that's fine. It takes a lot of sugar, but you're gonna love it. So this is a period-esque recipe. I don't have the original recipe I used, but I can probably find it if you're really interested. But I think that concludes the recorded section of our presentation, and we can open it up to questions and answers.